bad things can happen too. So no, we're going to open our country.
Sorry,
we want it open.
When you say Dr. Fauci is playing both sides, are you suggesting that the advice
Well,
he's giving to you is different?
I was surprised by his answer, actually, because, it's just, to me, it's not an acceptable answer, especially when it comes to schools. The only thing that would be acceptable, as I said, is professors, teachers, etc., over a certain age. I think they ought to take it easy for another few weeks, 5 weeks, 4 weeks, who knows, whatever it may be. But I think they have to be careful because this is a disease that attacks age and it attacks health. And if you have a heart problem, if you have diabetes, if you're a certain age, it's certainly much more dangerous. But with the young children, and students, it's really, just take a look at the statistics. It's pretty amazing.
So to be clear, Trump is rebuking Dr. Fauci for not falling over himself to send children back to school in the middle of a global pandemic. The warning came when Dr. Fauci testified virtually for the Senate and had a bit of a clash with one of Trump's most vocal supporters, Rand Paul.
Much as I respect you, Dr. Fauci, I don't think you're the end all. I don't think you're the one person that gets to make a decision. We can listen to your advice, but there are people on the other side saying there's not going to be a surge and that we can safely open the economy, and the facts will bear this out. But if we keep kids out of school for another year, what's going to happen is the poor and underprivileged kids who don't have a parent that's able to teach them at home are not going to learn for a full year. And I think we ought to look at the Swedish model, and we ought to look at letting our kids get back to school. I think it's a huge mistake if we don't open the schools in the fall. Thank you.
Well, first of all, Senator Paul, thank you for your comments. I have never made myself out to be the end-all and only voice in this. I'm a scientist, a physician, and a public health official. I give advice according to the best scientific evidence. There are a number of other people who come into that and give advice that are more related to the things that you spoke about the need to get the country back open again and economically. I don't give advice about economic things. I don't give advice about anything other than public health. So I wanted to respond to that. The second thing is that you use the word we should be humble about what we don't know. And I think that falls under the fact that we don't know everything about this virus. And we really better be very careful, particularly when it comes to children, because the more and more we learn, we're seeing things about what this virus can do that we didn't see from the studies in China or in Europe. For example, right now, children presenting with COVID-19, who actually have a very strange inflammatory syndrome, very similar to Kawasaki's syndrome. I think we better be careful if we are not cavalier in thinking that children are completely immune to the deleterious effects. So again, you're right in the numbers that children in general do much, much better than adults and the elderly, and particularly those with underlying conditions. But I am very careful and hopefully humble in knowing that I don't know everything about this disease, and that's why I'm very reserved in making broad predictions.
You gotta love Rand Paul telling one of the country's leading epidemiologists that he's not the end-all, which is quite the lecture coming from a guy who visited the Senate gym while infected with coronavirus. Now, before anything else, I just have to ask, do we really need to have Democrats lecture Republicans, the supposed pro-life party, about the importance of not sending children out in the middle of a pandemic? If nothing else, what this all shows is that all of the value sets that the Republicans hid behind while claiming the moral high ground, like being pro-life or pro-family values, were just empty platitudes they spouted while they worked to lower taxes. The same way you don't get to call yourself pro-family values after supporting a guy who cheated on every wife he's had and bragging about sexual assault, Republicans also don't get to call themselves pro-life when the hill they've opted to die on is sacrificing grandparents and children so we can get the economy back up and running. Those so-called values were always just a front for what their actual priority was: money. Now, Trump criticizes Fauci for supposedly playing both sides, and if it ever seems like Fauci is playing both sides, he may very well be, but in the sense that he has to reconcile actual science with just enough kowtowing to Trump so that he doesn't get fired. Because rest assured, if Fauci dares stray too far away from Trump's talking points, Trump will get rid of him, even though those talking points might completely contradict the truth. Like, for example, when Trump claimed in this very clip that children fare amazingly in the face of coronavirus.
But with the young children, and students, it's really, just take a look at the statistics. It's pretty amazing.
In reality, not only are children not doing amazingly, but some are actually experiencing complications that even adults aren't experiencing. There are now a slew of cases of a Kawasaki disease-like inflammatory syndrome associated with coronavirus, wherein children are presenting with fevers, rashes, and respiratory symptoms. It's being called pediatric multisystem inflammatory syndrome temporally associated with COVID-19, and it's already led to a number of children dying. So again, I get that Trump's first, second, and third priorities are the S&P 500, but I don't think you'll find a parent on God's green earth who would be willing to send their children into harm's way if they had a choice. And the fact that Trump doesn't seem to mind, with a 14-year-old son himself, probably tells you everything you need to know about him as a parent. But the fact is that the American people don't want Dr. Fauci to get fired. In an administration where essentially no one is qualified, having one of the nation's premier epidemiologists present during a pandemic is unquestionably a good thing. It's one thing to send Ivanka to the UN or have Jared Kushner try and broker peace in the Middle East when clearly their presence is just a glorified version of Take Your Child to Work Day, but we need Dr. Fauci leading this charge. So if he needs to play both sides to keep his job and occasionally coddle the ego of a tiny man with thin skin who is only capable of viewing the worst public health crisis in a century through the lens of helping himself, then so be it. The rest of us understand that Trump needs an endless stream of adulation, so sure, let Dr. Fauci equivocate a little bit. It just makes Trump look all the more pathetic, and at the end of the day, we still have at least one adult in the room, and especially in an administration like this one, that is what's most important.